The following program was produced by an independent community producer. The opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect those of the QATV staff or board of directors. QATV, in compliance with FCC regulations, is prohibited from exercising control over the content of independent, member-produced public access programming.
Turn out the light. Believe. This is Greater Boston Paranormal.
Do you feel it? It went through like a path, like a wave.
Are you still here with us? What are your intentions?
Murder.
Hi there. Welcome to Greater Boston Paranormal. We are three members anyway of the Greater Boston Paranormal Associates. My name is Don DiCristofaro. I'm here with Michele Rosner and Pat Connors. And tonight we're going to talk a little bit about our group, and we're going to talk about what our plans are for this show and beyond, I think. So I guess I'll start by saying that we have been doing this, Pat and I anyway, for about 15 years now. We've been members of a number of different groups, and we spent a lot of time aboard USS Salem, which we'll talk about at length a little bit later on. And over time, you know, I think that we've gained a lot of experience working with different groups and doing different things with different people and using different methods. And I think what you're going to find as you watch us over a period of time, you're going to see that we also have a hell of a lot of fun in terms of what we do. So let's talk a little bit initially about where we come from. You know, the group has grown, you know, from basically just Pat and I to start with. We're a group of 12. We're a group of 12 people now, and we've grown into a very diverse group of people who do things a lot of different ways. And I think one of the interesting things about us is that we've all kind of come into the paranormal from different directions. You know, a lot of groups are people who have all had experiences and who all grew up with the paranormal around them, and some of us are certainly like that. Myself, I'm kind of a rarity in the paranormal community in that prior to beginning investigations, I had never had any experience. I had never had any experience with the paranormal. It was just something that interested me when I was a kid, and the few of my friends who read at all were reading Robert Louis Stevenson's Kidnapped. I was reading Hans Holzer's Ghost Hunter, and that's just kind of the way things developed from there. When I got to be 16, I think, my older brother gave me a copy of John Keel's Mothman Prophecies, and that was the book that showed me I had to be more involved than just reading about it in books. I had to get out and see what the heck was going on and experience some of this stuff for myself. So I know, Michele, you came into this thing from an entirely different angle, didn't you?
Yes. So the paranormal, which I didn't know at the time, has been part of my life for as long as I can remember. As a kid, there was constant energy around me. I could see and hear different entities, and over time, I put up a wall around myself to block it away. And then just recently, a couple of years ago, a very personal situation happened where I felt like I really had to understand what was going on with me, so that I could help others that were in the same situation.
Right, and I guess I should stress that, you know, one of the things that we do, and one of the things that we strive to do, is to help people who are in situations where they're affected by the paranormal in one way or another, whether it's a situation where it's a person who's in a house that has some kind of issue, or a business, or their personal space has some kind of paranormal involvement, and they'd like to either find out what's going on, or in some cases rid themselves of whatever's there. That's part of what we do. Part of what we do also is to help those that have passed away and the entities that we deal with pass over to where their final destination might be. This is something we've done on a number of occasions, and we'll talk about that a little bit more as we move along. So Pat, you're kind of a hybrid of getting into this stuff, aren't you?
Yeah, I got into the paranormal probably in the 70s, and I watched the show from the 70s called In Search Of with Leonard Nimoy, and I'm sure probably anybody over the age of 50 knows what I'm talking about. But yeah, it had all aspects of the paranormal. Ghosts, Loch Ness Monster, the Bigfoot. It had everything in it, and I just loved it. So later on, I started reading, like Don said, Hans Holzer. I started reading the Warrens, who you'll probably remember them from The Conjuring House. But yeah, I just started reading anything I could after that, and watching anything I could after that to do with the paranormal. So yeah, that was my first start in the paranormal, and it's just been going from there.
Sure. So, one of the things that's happened to us, I think, over the years, and Michele and I had the opportunity to address a group in Salem back in the fall, and one of the things we talked about was how we've evolved as a group. How things have changed over time, and how we've moved into different areas and done some things a little bit differently than we did when we started out. So, one of the ways in which I think we've evolved is that those of you who watch the shows on TV, you see all the technical equipment that people use, and we use all that equipment. We have an SLS camera, which we'll talk about at some point. I don't think we're going to do it tonight, but at some point we'll break out the SLS camera, and we'll talk to you a little bit about how it works. We use a FLIR, which is forward-looking infrared. This is basically heat signature photography and videography. We use that. We use all of the technical stuff and the technical tools that are at our disposal. But myself, what I've found of late is that I've moved into a much more personal area. And I found, and while it may sound silly to those of you who aren't involved and who have never done this kind of thing, the truth of the matter is I've found that as I use the tools that are more personal, that are more in my hands, I find that the entities we deal with, particularly on the ship, I think they can tell that I'm giving them a little bit more of myself. Mm-hmm. And in return, they give a little bit more of themselves back to me. And we'll show you at some point, as we progress here, we'll show you some video of those activities and the kinds of things that we do. But I did want to show you, we talked about bringing some equipment along with us today. And some of the equipment that I've started to use are dowsing rods. And I'm not going to use them here because there's nothing going on. But
as far as you know.
To the best of my knowledge. So what these are simple copper rods. They have a sleeve on the short end. They have a sleeve on the short end, which the rod is inserted into, so that as I hold them, I'm never actually touching the rod itself. And you can see how it just swings freely. And I use these to ask questions of entities that we deal with. I ask them initially how are they going to tell me what the answer is? And what normally happens is, and I'm doing this myself, what normally happens is, I ask them, if the answer is yes, what are you going to do? And what happens is the rods cross. And when the answer is no, what are you going to do? And the rods separate. That's generally the way it works. However, the other thing that these will do is I can ask an entity to point. Can you tell me, exactly where in the room are you standing? And they'll point. Oh, look, there's Pat. So they'll point at where they are, or they'll point at something that they're trying to show us, and that's something that happens occasionally too. So that's one of the tools that we've started to use. The other more personal tool is something that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. This is a pendulum. And it's very similar to the dowsing rods. I don't know how closely you can see that. This is what's called a spirit board. And as you can see, it's similar to a Ouija board in a lot of ways, in that it's got the letters and numerals, and it's got yes or no. And this is something, it's going to be tough to show you here, but this is something you would hold the pendulum. And similar to the dowsing rods, you would say, if the answer is yes, and in most cases, the pendulum is going to turn. And if the answer is no, it's going to swing back and forth. And I've got to tell you, whether you believe it or not, and I'm going to be honest and say that I was dubious when I first saw how these things worked. But regardless of whether or not you believe in it, it's pretty impressive to watch this thing swinging around wildly and then all of a sudden come to a dead stop. Or all of a sudden come to a stop and start swinging back and forth. It's pretty impressive to see. And
yeah, it seems like it defies the laws of physics.
Yeah, it really does. And even if you're not entirely believable, or you don't entirely believe what you think is happening or what we're saying is happening, that's pretty hard to explain. The movement of the pendulum is pretty difficult to explain. So these are the tools that I've come to use. These are the things that I enjoy using. But as I said, we all do different things. Pat, why don't you talk a little bit about what you brought along with you?
Oh, sure. So this you've probably seen on every paranormal show that's out there. This is called an EMF detector. So electromagnetic field. That's what it registers. And this is probably the tool that every electrician out there has, so they can find electricity in a house. But we use it to actually find ghosts. Yeah. So how it's actually used, it's pretty simple. You just turn on the button, and it'll go to the first green light, and we'll place it on the table or wherever you want to put it. And we usually ask questions of the spirits, and what it can do is it can register on here an answer. If you see the lights actually going up, going into the green or red, orange, then maybe you have an answer from a spirit about about them, using this instrument. What the spirits can also do is at certain times, if they're in a location and you put this in a location, they can just come along and you can detect their presence just by having it in a certain location. This is also susceptible to cell phones. So if you go into a location with a cell phone, you'll see that this will actually register the cell phone. So it can get that radiation coming off the cell phone. So yeah, you always want to turn your cell phone to airplane mode when you're using this. So we've had great success in everywhere we go with this thing, especially if you're going to places that have no electricity in them. You know that something's going on, definitely going on, because you have no interference. So this is a great tool for that. Yeah. And also, for recordings, we take recordings wherever we go, and hopefully we catch an EVP, electronic voice phenomenon, which could be a spirit. When you listen back later to your recording and you hear something odd that's not one of the people present, it could be a spirit actually coming across. And I've had great success actually just using my cell phone to do that, obviously in airplane mode. But yeah, just go to any kind of voice recording app on your cell phone, and you can be a ghost hunter too. But yeah, you can listen back, and it takes years to actually figure out that something might be an EVP. Years of listening to recordings. They usually have a certain sound to them that they sound like they're playing from an old radio. But tinny, yeah, a tinny sound. But they usually come across. Sometimes they'll say stuff that you're talking about. They might come into a conversation that you're having with another person. But yeah, sometimes it'll sound just like nobody there. It might sound like a little girl when no little girl is present. Might sound like an old man. But yeah, this is one of the first tools that a paranormal investigator uses, and with great success. It's the tool that I usually go right to.
And we're gonna play some EVPs here at some point. But there's something. Can I see the K2 for a second? So as Pat said, if you've ever watched a ghost hunting show on TV, you've seen this bad boy, because everybody uses them, and they were kind of, I'm going to say, kind of the original, piece of tech equipment that ghost hunters used. And I think maybe on our next round of equipment that we kind of show everybody, there's a new piece of equipment that has, I'm not going to say replace the K2, because nothing will replace the K2. But there's a new piece of equipment called a REM pod. And the interesting thing about the REM pod, kind of the way the K2 has evolved, is that rather than just measuring the electromagnetic field, the REM pod creates its own. And by creating its own magnetic field, what it does is it not only measures a new EMF, but it measures the delta between the background electromagnetic field and anything new or anything that's happening, from another location or from another source. So next time we come back, that'll be part of the next round. But that's kind of how things are changing all the time. And the tools people use change all the time, and I just wanted to point that out. We're ready to. So here's what we're going to do. Pat talked a little bit about EVPs, and we're going to get to your stuff because you brought something new too. So, but we're going to start with an EVP that we recorded aboard USS Salem. This happened. This was a few years ago now, and the voices. Well, you're going to hear one of our female investigators. Pat, myself, and this woman were the only people aboard the ship. Riley Black, her name is. The three of us were the only ones aboard the ship, and we were standing outside the surgical area. And what we were talking about was how we were going to get in there. The surgical area on the ship has a piece of plexiglass bolted to the door, and we have a key to the back door, so we can get in there, but we must not have the key, because we were talking about how to get in there. And when we veered off to a different direction, one of the spirits, I think, reminded us of what we had forgotten to do. So let's hear that first EVP.
Oh, this is the surgical area.
You want to go with the EVP?
How did you get the... Very cool.
I just said to the video camera.
Oh, this is the surgical area.
You want to go with the easy way? Yeah.
How did you get there? Very cool.
That's a lot in here.
I just said to the video camera.
Oh, this is the surgical area.
You want to go with the easy way? Yeah.
How did you get there? Very cool.
That's a lot in here.
I just said to the video camera. So I hope, I can only hope you can hear it. We could play it again if we have to, but I think it's pretty clear. And it's kind of great because what it indicates is one of the things that happens aboard the ship, and we'll get into the ship here shortly, but one of the things that happens aboard the ship is that many of the entities aboard like to take part in our conversations. And a lot of the best recordings we have seem to be when we've stopped investigating and are just kind of sitting around yakking, when an entity will, at some point or somehow, some way, remind us that they're the reason we're there. So I hope you heard that what this entity did was, as we started to talk about what we were going to do once we got into the surgical room, this entity reminded us that we hadn't figured out how we were gonna get there yet by simply saying, "How would you get there?" It's fast, but I think it's pretty clear.
That's got to be the clearest EVP I've ever heard.
That is certainly one of the clearest EVPs I've ever heard. It's certainly the clearest one I've ever. Well, no, that's not true. It is one of the clearest EVPs we've ever been involved in. There's no question.
Yeah.
And the next one is similar in terms of context, because we were having a discussion about the babies. There were about a dozen babies born on the ship at one time. This is in the early 50s, and we were talking about where the babies slept, and I think one of the entities told us why the babies slept in the racks that the sailors slept in. Let's roll that, boy.
Would it hold our weight, or are they too old?
No, it's really cool.
Would it hold our weight, or are they too old?
No, it's really cool.
Would it hold our weight, or are they too old?
No, it's really cool. So there's one that it's not nowhere near as loud as the first one was, but in my opinion anyway, I think it's just as clear. There's a caveat to that though. In my opinion, this thing very clearly is a man telling us that they had no cribs aboard the ship. But what I guess I have to admit is that when we played this recording to crowds, about half the crowd seems to say that it says no crying. Michelle's nodding her head because that's what she hears.
When we had a group on, I think it was in September, there's probably 20 of us in the room, and we all heard kind of different things.
Everybody heard it differently. I mean, but it's always no cribs or no crying.
Yeah.
To me, it's the syllables. I hear 2 syllables, no cribs. That's what I hear.
It can be a big point of contention with people listening to EVPs about what it is. But I mean, I agree with Don. It sounds like no cribs to me. But to other people, no crying.
But that's cool. I mean, that's part of the fun of that's part of the fun of what we do, and that's part of the difficulty of what we do as well, right? I mean, you can imagine having heard that how, the concentration that it took to go through 2 hours of audio to hear that whispered voice, and that's just one of the things that we do.
Yeah,
so,
it's like finding a gold nugget when you do get something like this, and it sounds like something that's not happening in the room. You feel like you've struck gold. It's a fantastic feeling.
And a lot of the times, the recordings you don't hear with your ears at the time, but when you go back and you play it, it's it's something you didn't hear. It's clear, and I think the spirits speak at a different frequency than we're talking, and then it's not until you play it later that the voice comes out.
Yeah, sometimes speed is a factor too.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes later on, if you hear something odd, you slow it down and you understand what they're saying. So they speak at a different rate maybe too. Yeah, at times.
Well, there are all different permutations of what we're talking about here, right? I mean, the same night, I want to say the same night, we were down in one of the birthing areas, and Riley heard a noise, and she asked what it was. And I said to her, it was the gangway. As the ship, as big as the ship is, it moves a little bit, and there's not even in mild weather, the ship moves a little bit in the water, and one of the things that happens when the ship moves is the gangway. The gangway moves. It's on these huge steel wheels, and you can hear that, and it's one of the things that, as investigators that have been on the ship for a long time, it's one of the noises we're just used to hearing, and we know that it's not
loud.
It's
very
not
loud.
something we need to pay any attention to. It's kind of interesting to see new people to the ship get all excited when they hear some of that banging and stuff. But we know that that's something that just happens. So in any event, that I want to say it was the same night we were on the ship and down in one of the berthing areas, and that noise happened. And I said something about what would happen if you were standing in the wrong place when the gangway moved. And as I said that, I turned to Pat and Riley and I said, "Wow, did you hear that? Remember this night?"
Yeah, oh yeah.
I said, "Oh my God, did you hear that?" And neither one of them heard a thing. When we played the audio back, very clearly you heard a man, when I talked about getting hurt by the gangway, very clearly you heard a man say, "Oh, my leg." And what I told these guys later was that whoever that guy was, he whispered it right in my ear. I heard it as though he was standing right next to me. So that's something that happens. They were in the same room. They were right next to me. Based on the volume, there's no way they shouldn't have heard it, but neither one of them did. We've been in rooms on the ship when we didn't record anything, yet we all heard. What was it we heard not that long ago? Oh, one of the things. Well, let me wait. We'll get into that in a little while when we start talking about the ship. The ship is such a broad subject that we'll wait a little while. Let's talk about the stuff that you brought to show us.
So we have a lot of electronic gadgets that we use. This one's been out for a couple of years. It's called a Paralight, and it works very much like the EMF detector. One of the things that we noticed when we first got this thing was that it wasn't as sensitive as the EMF detector. And I mean, what this is basically a camping lantern. And as it's exposed to more energy, it lights up kind of like a lighthouse, goes through the spectrum and ends in red. And, when we first got it, it was like, does this thing even work? Like, what does it do? But now on the ship, especially, we get all kinds of hits on this particular device. The one thing that will absolutely set this thing off is a walkie-talkie. So you have to be careful if your radios are on, because then you'll get some false positives on on this Paralight. There's a mini version of this that's available, and then just recently, the same company came out with this, my cords are everywhere, this tripwire, so you can either set it up lengthwise or across and see if something breaks the plane. It's the same kind of premise as the Paralight.
Make great Christmas lights too.
Yeah, but as it comes in contact with different levels of EMFs, they will change colors. Just recently saw this on one of the popular ghost hunting shows, and so now we have it to try out.
Yeah, this is something we've yet to use.
Yeah, so I can't wait to get that on the ship and see if we can get some activity with this.
Put it out in one of the passageways.
Yeah, I think that would be cool. But as Don said, lately, I personally, just being a sensitive, I've been really relying on my pendulum a lot. I get a good sense of, not only feeling, but actually seeing by what the pendulum does, where spirit energy comes from. In specific places, because on the ship or anywhere else for that matter, if I put the pendulum down, typically if it starts spinning in a clockwise or counterclockwise direction, that's kind of a space where spirit energy can come in. So, but I've been getting away from the electronic stuff lately and relying on myself more.
And last season, was it the season before, that we've identified a couple of portals on the ship,
Yeah.
primarily using your pendulum.
Yeah, there's two that I know of, and they pop up all over the place. But there's one down in berthing, and there's one in that our favorite room by the anchor windlass.
Right. Right. And this is something that that we'll talk about a little bit. One of the reasons the ship is so active, and it's always been a little bit of a mystery, but one of the reasons we believe the ship is so active is that now we've found a couple of what are called portals aboard the ship. And a portal is just what it sounds like. It's a space where entities can come and go. And as a result, we now know that some of the entities aboard the ship are not from the ship, but are from the shipyard and from the surrounding area. So we'll talk about that a little bit more as well. So I think we talked about ourselves a little bit. Let's move on to USS Salem and what we do there and what we found there. How's that sound?
Yes.
Okay. So those of you who are watching this, you're in Quincy or environs, and you may be aware that USS Salem is a decommissioned heavy cruiser, Des Moines class heavy cruiser that is at the old Fort River shipyard now. It is the only heavy cruiser left in existence. Her sister ships, the Newport News and Des Moines, are now razor blades or some other benign piece of steel. And Salem is back in her birthplace of Quincy. And she came home in 1993. She was built there in 1949. Right after the war. I think initially the plan was to build her for the war, but as things went, she ended up not being commissioned until 1949. And she was only in service for 10 years, which is a very short time for a Navy ship. But I think, by 1959, the Americans, the Russians, it was a submarine Navy at that point, and Salem was just too big and too slow. She wasn't built for the kind of war that the Cold War developed into. But she is a beautiful ship, and while she could use work, she is in great shape when you consider how long she's been around.
Yeah, it's a time capsule.
She really is, and we are very, very fortunate to be kind of the home paranormal team aboard USS Salem, which I have to say is at this point considered to be by many the most haunted location in New England. And that's interesting. I mean,
we're a little biased. But
Well, we
yeah.
we are biased, but we've been to a lot of different places. We've done a lot of investigations around the Northeast, and while we've been a lot of places that are, I'm going to say, heavier, darker in terms of energy, in terms of pure volume of activity, I'm going to go out on a limb and say there is no place like the ship. You know, we give investigations on the ship pretty much every weekend throughout the spring and summer and most of the fall, and it's very difficult to sit in a room on the Salem for very long without hearing footsteps in the passageway or things along those lines. And these are the things that happen to us virtually every weekend. The Salem is, I often tell people that I would be surprised if there were any other Navy ships in existence that saw no combat, never saw battle, never fired or guns in anger, was never fired at, but saw as much death as USS Salem did. The numbers are somewhat sketchy, but the truth is that in 1953, when the Salem was in the Mediterranean, she spent the majority of her career as the flagship of the United States Navy 6th Fleet in the Mediterranean. And in 1953, there was a very bad earthquake on one of the Ionian Islands off the coast of Greece. And because Salem is such a big ship and was the flagship and was there, basically, she was, for all intent and purposes, the hospital for all of these people that were hurt and affected by the earthquake in a physical way. The number of people that were brought aboard the ship is really not known. I think it's safe to say they were more concerned with getting people aboard and treated and getting more people aboard than they were counting them. But there were a lot of deaths aboard the ship, and even though she was only there for about 4 days, she wasn't built for that kind of mission. She didn't have fresh water or medical supplies or food even to really last that long. So she was only there for about 4 days, and the death toll from the earthquake is estimated to be in the neighborhood of 75, along with somewhere between 12 and 15 births, some of which were successful and some were not. And there were a number of animals aboard the ship during that period of time as well. So when the Salem left Greece, she didn't come back to Boston, which was her home port. She went to the Brooklyn Naval Shipyard for what I'm told was a radar upgrade. And she wasn't going to be there very long, but the first night she was there, a ship moored outboard of Salem. For those of you who aren't nautical types, what that means is the Salem tied up to the pier and another ship tied up to the Salem. Well, the first night they were there together, there was a fire aboard that smaller ship. I believe it was a light cruiser. And it wasn't a very serious fire. They got it under control pretty quickly. And as the fire control teams were putting their equipment away and starting to straighten up after the fire, one of the ammunition magazines aboard the ship detonated. And since it was built somewhat like the Salem, it took the hospital with it. So all of the guys that were in the hospital at that time were moved to the Salem, as well as the guys that were hurt in the explosion and quite a few guys that were burned in the subsequent fire. Those guys were all brought aboard Salem for treatment, and a number of those guys died aboard the ship. Amazingly, about 2 years later, when she was on the way back to the Med via France, she was steaming with a destroyer by the name of the John R. Pierce. The Pierce was doing anti-aircraft drills or exercises, and my understanding is they stopped the exercise for some reason or other, as happens, and as they did, they had loaded a gun when they stopped the exercise. And when the exercise resumed, it's my understanding that they loaded that gun again, which of course is a recipe for disaster. So when they fired the double-loaded gun, the mount exploded. One guy was killed immediately in that explosion, and 5 guys were brought from the Pierce to the Salem for treatment, and 3 of those guys died aboard Salem as well. So, the death toll aboard Salem just in that short period of time from 53 to 56 is estimated to be nearly 100. As well as numerous, I say numerous, 2 accidents aboard Salem that cost the lives of Salem crewmen as well. So as I said, she never saw combat, but there was a lot of death aboard the ship, and it was a diverse death. It wasn't just sailors. It wasn't guys that were stationed aboard the ship. There were a number of Greek civilians that were killed, and there were other civilians that were killed aboard the ship as well. And as I said earlier, we've now found some portals, and we've been in touch with people that we believe are not from the ship, but are from the shipyard. And that's one of the reasons there is so much activity aboard the ship. One of the things we talk about is the language barrier. We've had, a lot of the civilians, as I said, are Greeks, yet there doesn't seem to be too much of a language difficulty between us and those that we speak to. We speak to a number of people who are Greek civilians. There's a young man by the name of Nico that we speak to on a very regular basis, and this is a guy who, we always love talking to him. It's always nice when these people trust you to the extent that they seem happy to engage with you. The problem with Nico was you always felt horrible when you finished the discussion, because Nico was a young man who was looking for his family.
Yeah, none of these stories from these spirits that we interact with are good. They're always tragic stories. So that's what we have to deal with every time you go to a location, is that it's usually a dark story, and the Salem's no different.
No, that's right, and one of the things that makes the Salem interesting in that respect is that not only do we have the full spectrum, we have sailors, we have Greek civilians, and we have a number of children aboard the ship. There's a young girl by the name of Lucy that we speak to on a very regular basis. We believe to be a 7-year-old Greek girl. And we have one more audio recording we want to play. It's not quite as easy to hear as the others, I don't think, but I find it to be much more impactful than the others in terms of what it says. And we'll leave it. We're going to play it. Maybe we'll play it twice. We'll play it once and let you hear it and see what you think. And then after we talk about it, we'll play it one more time to see if, once we tell you what it says, you can hear it a little bit more clearly. So let's play that last EVP and see if people can figure out what it says.
Oh, I remember you all too well.
Okay, so as I said, it's not quite as clear. It's certainly not as loud as the others, but I always considered it to be, as I said, a little bit more impactful, at least to me anyway, because what you hear again is Riley Black, and as this is in a passageway aboard the ship. Actually, I want to say we're up high. We're up in the tower, and Riley clearly sensed or heard someone, because she says, "Oh, I remember you very well, or all too well." And if you listen very carefully, what you hear, at least what I believe you hear, is a little girl saying, "Come play with me," or "Come with me." Come with me.
Come
play
with me.
In kind of a sing-songy voice. So we're gonna, now that I told you what it says, we're gonna play it one more time and see if maybe now that you know what to listen for, let's see if you hear it a little bit more closely.
Oh, I remember you all too well.
So I think they did a pretty good job of playing it to make sure you could hear it, and the more I listen to it, the clearer it is. And as I said, I for whatever reason I can't explain, I just that affects me a lot more than some of the others, just because this sounds like somebody who's looking for a companionship or who's looking for somebody to play with, and the kids on the ship always seem to affect me that way. So anyway, we talked a little bit about the history of the ship. As I said, from mid-April to nearly Thanksgiving, we are aboard the ship many weekends. Many groups like ours will rent the ship for a night, so they have the ship to themselves. There'll be a couple of us there just to guide them around, but that's what happens most weekends aboard the ship. Having said that, we have public investigations, and I'm going to tell you that having been on a few public investigations at other locations, I'm going to toot our own horn a little bit, and I'm going to say that I think the investigations we run are far better than you're going to see at a lot of other locations. And that's not to disparage anybody. Different locations have different requirements, and people have to do things a little differently based on where they are. We're very fortunate because we have a great location. And one of the things that makes it such a great location is that it's enclosed. And we can kind of separate everybody but keep everybody together at the same time. And one of the other things that makes it great for public investigations is that virtually anything can happen anywhere aboard Salem. You are just as likely to hear footsteps in the passageway when you're in the Chief Petty Officer's mess as you are if you're in the crew's mess, or if you're in the officer's mess up forward, or any of the other rooms.
The women's bathroom.
Or the women's. I can't speak from personal experience, but I've heard the screams from the women's bathroom. So that's the kind of thing that happens, as well.
You got to understand that there's sailors on board, so yeah, you might hear something from the women's bathroom.
Right, that's exactly right. So, one of the things that we pride ourselves in when we do the tours aboard the ship is that I think the tours that we give are far more interactive than a lot of other ghost tours are. In that what we do is, before we spread out, and we split into small groups, we try to keep the groups at 5 people or so. Usually we cap an investigation at 25 people or so, and we try to split into groups of 5 or 6. And different members of our crew will take a group and take them to various parts of the ship. That's what Michele talked about, the walkie-talkies. That's how we keep in touch and we know where everybody is. Walkie-talkies are kind of an important part of our investigation, not only so that we keep in touch in terms of who's where, but also when you hear a noise aboard the ship, when you hear footsteps, when you hear voices or you hear footsteps above you, as you often hear, it's a good idea with the radio to check to see where everybody is and exactly what it is you're hearing. So as we split into small groups, Michele showed you the Paralight. We have a number of them. The REM pods, we have a number of REM pods. We have a number of K2s. And what we do is we dish out the equipment to the guests so that the guests basically are able to do their own investigation. We're there, of course, and we kind of keep things on track. But the guests basically do their own investigation. And as they do that, the members of the team also have other equipment that is their own or that we only have one piece of. And the guests get to see different things. As we're in various areas, they'll see us use our sticks. They'll get to see us use our pendulums. A lot of people will give you a thumbs down, but the truth is we use a Ouija board on some of our investigations. I'll throw another caveat out and say that we're very careful with the Ouija board. We have one member who's very, 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 very practiced with the board, and we don't use it unless she's around. But we do use it, and I can tell you that we've used it with great success. We've used it to the point where we've been on investigations where the only time I've ever seen people with their fingers on the planchette, and it was the board that moved. We've had the board spin. We've had the board turn to face the individual they want to talk to. So we've used it with pretty good success. But as I said, we're very, very careful with it. It's a tool like everything else, but personally, I think it's a dangerous tool if you don't really know what you're doing. So we're very careful with it. But in any event, the tours we give, I think, are more interactive than most, and you should give it a thought if you'd like. Our first public investigation of the season is April 16th this spring, and you're going to see at the bottom of the screen, you're going to see the Salem's website, and if you'd like to go to the Salem's website to buy tickets, that's where you can go, and that's all I'm going to say about that. I will say that the three recordings that you heard were all from the ship. We have a number of incredible photographs that we took on the ship of shadow entities and things of that nature, and we have some pretty solid video from the ship as well. Things that you can see on our YouTube channel. Things that you can see when you come and visit us. So we'd invite you to come. You can reach out to us anytime you want, and we'll talk about when you can come to the ship. So I think we're done with the ship for now, and we'll talk about as a group. I like to say that I don't want to be considered the guys from the ship. We do a lot of other things. We've investigated a lot of other locations. The ones that you probably have heard of. We've spent nights at the Lizzie Borden House. I personally have spent 3 nights at the Lizzie Borden House. We've spent 2 nights at, if any of you saw the movie The Conjuring, we've spent 2 nights at the Conjuring House. Very interesting nights.
Yes, up for sale from last time I heard, 1.2 million.
1.2 million. We are? So we've spent a lot of nights at various places, and this is something that we'll talk about as we move forward here during the show. We're going to talk about those investigations. The other thing we plan to do is that we have some big investigations coming up. In June, 9 of us are going to make a trip to Iowa. We're going to visit a house called the Villisca Axe Murder House. And the same weekend, we're going to visit a house in Atchison, Kansas called the Sally House. These are considered 2 of the most haunted locations in the United States. And we plan on taking a ton of video and a ton of audio, and those are going to be shows that we're going to air here on QATV. That's the plan. Over the course of the shows, you're going to get to meet hopefully every member of the team at one time or another, where you're not just going to look at us 3 mugs on every show. We're going to rotate as much as we can and get everybody an opportunity to talk to you. We're going to show you a little bit more of the more advanced equipment that we use. And there are a number of guests, as you can imagine, the things that we do. We have a lot of friends that are really out there that I think you would really, really enjoy hearing from. So either in studio or via Zoom, we're going to talk to some of our friends who do some really, really interesting things, not just in the paranormal, but in the area of crypto technology or cryptozoology, in the area of extraterrestrials and UFOs and things of that nature. So I guess that's it for tonight. Thank you very much for watching. Pat, Michelle, thank you for being here. And with a little bit of luck, we will see you all next month. thank you again.
Bye-bye.